The audience, welcome. Welcome to our fireside chat and a series of talks which we have today for July. It's summer, but I hope the hardest working startups don't stop working and you're building great companies. So we have a big surprise for you. We prepared something which we didn't do before. It's a simple talk show where we'll discuss a few simple tips about how to get investor ready. So let's jump in. And first we'll show you who is coming to speak, and then I'll introduce our guests. So let's go for it. I would like to welcome three guests which we have. The first guest, we start with ladies. Kim is from WeWork Labs, Kim van Haalen. She works with startups in the UK, and they have many startups, so we'll hear her thoughts on how their startups are getting investor ready. We have David Willbe. David is a partner at Lewis Silken. David, welcome. And we have Derek Gallagher. Derek is a VP at Global Shares. So welcome, all three of you. And
Thank you.
Let's start with Kim. Kim, you organize quite a few investor pitches, and you can see the patterns on which startups get funded, which startups don't. What do you first see as the key pitfalls you see your startups or mistakes your startups do, which if they fix it, they can then go ahead and be successful at fundraising?
Thank you, Martin. I think that's a super important question. So we've done now, I think, 5 quarterly demo nights with around between 100 and 200 startups each. So they're quite big. What usually becomes very apparent is that those startups who, and I think a lot of accelerators make that mistake actually, they try to mold, put all the startups into the same mold. So they lose the authenticity. And that very quickly becomes very boring. So it's especially in such a big investor demo day, you have to stand out in some shape or form. So we very often see that the startups who do in some shape or form are able to get across some part of their uniqueness or their personality are usually the ones who get the most interest. And it's also something that's quite easy to fix, in my opinion. Okay.
David, once startups get investor ready, then they usually speak to you a little bit early on, and then you help them with the legal work and with the paperwork. What do you see as the most common pitfalls startups do, or ways how they do it unnecessarily difficult for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, if I could give people one thing to take away, the top one, and there are various things, is learn to speak the language. Like you go into investment and people will throw around terms like dilution and drags and, you know, pre's and posts and yeah, dilution is my favorite one. I've had 3 different discussions today about dilution with people at various different stages asking various different questions. And, you know, your investor will expect you to know what that means. And it's not difficult to find out. But I think, you know, people sort of expect that as soon as you go and become a founder of a startup, that you just magically know all that stuff. And that's just not really how it works. So, you know, take some time, do it a few months, 6 months even before you're actually going to go and look for funding. And go and learn what all of these things mean. Plug yourself into a community like Kim's that will help you learn these things. Or look on the internet, you know, there are great books and resources out there. I've written some blog articles a long time ago now that went up on the Startup Grind blog. So, you know, there's various ways to do it. But yeah, that would be my number one.
Talking about dilution, Derek, you are from Global Shares, which actually helps startups with cap table management. And I see many startups get surprised, you know, when they start introducing, for example, stock option pool. That many of the investors get diluted, and those startups at the beginning did not assume this is going to happen. what do you see from your perspective as some of the mistakes which companies do, which you help them solve?
So I think maybe if I can start by going back to Kim's piece first of all, right? Because we've all heard this analogy that like a startup looking for funding is basically like looking for a husband or a wife. So you got to start out with a bit of chemistry first of all. And I think that's what Kim's talked about. You've got to start out with that little spark that gets somebody interested. But then, as David said, as that relationship develops, people expect more of you. They're going to expect that you know what you're talking about, not just your product, not just the customers that you're going after, but your business, because those investors are not just investing in the product or the team, they're effectively investing in the business. And the way that happens is through the shares that they purchase, whether it's through convertible instruments or straight equity, and how that sits then on your cap table. So I think getting that understanding of what a cap table is, it's just that simple first step. Because when we speak to second-time founders, they know what cap tables are and they know why they're important. When we speak to first-time founders, it's quite often not the case, but obviously somewhere along the journey that becomes something that they have to learn about. So it's better to not learn about it the hard way and educate yourself ahead of time.
Yes, Kim, how do you normally keep track of the weaknesses of startups? How do you help them solve that? Do you just tell them verbally, or you have like a list of tasks which they need to go through until they make it, or it's very simple? As soon as they get funding, you know that they're ready.
It's a good question, actually. I firmly believe in the Y Combinator model, that you don't tell startups, especially founders, what to do, but you help them figure out what they should do, right? We don't have a list. We do work with our companies through stages. So often when they come in, they are in pre-launch or validation stage, and our goal is to get them to early growth, high growth. And that might come with funding. Some make it without having to fundraise, right? Which is a great situation to be in. So we do a lot through office hours and mentoring, right? So ahead of those demo days, though, we do get through a specific checklist. We call it our investor readiness module. So we help with the pitch decks and the pitches itself. But again, not with the aim to fit them all into the same mold, but rather just to help them highlight what's unique about their companies and what are their strong points, and iron out the areas they still need help with.
That makes sense as an approach, if you don't mind me jumping in, Marion. There are certain things which are fundamental, and I think Derek's addressing one of those, right? Your cap table, that's common to absolutely everybody, and having that understood is perfectly right. But to Kim's point, you could have a checklist, but you would be skipping over whole sections for various categories of startup because it just wouldn't be relevant to them. So, the one that I always come back to is, how do you deal with your intellectual property? Everybody's got something, whether it's a brand name or a logo or whatever it is. But for some people, that's the family silver, right? That's our secret algorithm that we absolutely need to have brilliantly protected with confidentiality or whatever else we're going to do, to protect it. Whereas for other people, well, it's my brand name. And yeah, I love my brand name, but if I have to change it, I have to change it. So where you're going to spend your time and energy, where you're going to spend your budget, there are certain fundamentals like your cap table, but outside of that, you've got to fit it to exactly what the company does.
And yeah, if I can, David, I think one of the things, so in a former life, like Kim, I've run an accelerator program, and what really amazed me was the amount of companies that come out of the accelerator with a different management team than they went in. And one of the things that, and Kim and David, you can speak to this better than I can, but one of the things that became really clear was that this mistake of startups having, two or three founders is fine. Like there's multiple arguments, should it be 2, 3, 4, but aside from that, but actually issuing equity to them up front and those founders owning that equity straight out is a real problem. And what happens is one founder leaves throughout this, whether it's an accelerator program or just over the first year or two, and they walk out the door with 15 or 20% equity. And then an investor comes in the door and they're looking to invest $500,000 or $1 million, and you're asking them for that for 15 or 20% equity. And they're saying, well, look, you've got somebody who's just walked out the door and they've got 15 or 20% equity and they're adding nothing. So one of the things that's really important across the board is for founders, the founding team, to vest their ownership.
And vesting founder ownership, are there any specifics or any areas which David, you recommend as a default? Like most companies vest over a period of 3 or 4 years. Do you recommend to be vesting for all the founders, or just not the primary ones? What are recommendations here?
Yeah, well, yeah, depends who's asking, Marion. I mean, to be sort of candid, that the hardest thing to do in the very, very early stages is set a trigger. So what do I mean by that? Everybody understands what vesting is, right? Vesting is, as long as you're still with the business, you keep your shares. If you leave, you give them back, right? Everybody gets that. And later on, when you've got, employees and they've got employment agreements, and it's very clear whether or not that agreement is still running or they've left, that's easy. If you've got 3 founders, sure, possibly one of them's going to throw up their hands and say, I quit, and walk away. And then okay, well, Bob's left. So, that triggers the vesting clawback. But what if Bob's just not pulling his weight? If you've got 3 people and 2 of them think that the third one isn't doing it, should they be able to say, well, we're triggering your vesting now and we're going to give we're going to take your shares back? Or actually, does that leave you too open to interpersonal dynamics and that sort of thing all cropping up? There is a school of thought that says, well, look, if 2 want to go forward and ditch 1, that's probably how it should work in a 3-person company. But I'm not sure personally that I think that's quite the right answer. I think there should be some sort of standard. And without an employment agreement in those early stages, as a nice, clear sort of delineation of you don't work here anymore, you don't go here. How do you draw that line? That for me is the hardest question in the early going.
Okay, Kim, do you have an answer? How do you draw the line?
I have no idea, and actually it's quite funny because David, I should have called you yesterday because I was in an office hour with one of my founders exactly this question, right? They were about to, and I'm pretty sure they don't mind me talking about it. So they were about to give an early advisor, who was a high-profile advisor, 30% in equity. I can see David's face. I don't know if everybody can see it, but like it's quite normal, right? Like for us, we go like, wow, that's way too much. Don't do it. Don't go that direction. But for someone who's running their first company, how do you know that other than, having people around you who can advise you? So, Marianne, I don't know the answer. I actually also don't think. Yes, we often hear that it's better to have co-founders and that investors are more interested in teams that have multiple founders. However, a lot of the angel investors and VCs that come in for office hours in WeWork Labs, they don't really mind. Like they also have investments in teams with one founder, as long as they can somehow prove they're able to attract the right people around them, right? Whether it's early employees or advisors. Quite curious to hear Derek's and David's thoughts on that as well.
Okay. Derek, in your experience, once you get companies onboarded and they're becoming customers, which by the way, it's pretty neat. It's if I remember correctly, it's up to 10 users for free.
Yeah. So
you're making their lives easier. What are some key pains which when customers come to you, which you help them solve?
So look, I think there's a couple of things. I think one is that, first of all, so there's a couple of people. If you look at who's in the mix, there's the company themselves, there's their legal advisors, and potentially investors, right? So that investor might be an angel investor, it might be an accelerator program, or it might be an institutional investor or VC fund. And the first thing that happens is the legal advisors and the investors realize that the companies aren't fully educated in this space. So they have to spend time educating the company. And in some cases that costs the company, that costs them money or potentially credibility. So we obviously, we do a lot of work around educating companies around what they should do. So we have a whole academy section on our website, which allows you to go in and learn, the various bits and pieces. And the reason we have a sort of 0 to 10 shareholders is free model is it's exactly like what Kim's talked about. So if you want to bring companies that are on an accelerator program to an investor ready state, they're not ready to pay for something they don't fully understand yet. So give it to them free, let them, put best practices in place and let them establish that with their accelerator, with their investors, with their legal advisors. And as the firm grows, as the company grows, everybody benefits. So I think really it's just back to that piece. It's education is the first thing, because they have to be able to go and educate themselves, and then just trying to keep this simple, because it can be a very complex space, and we work really, really, really hard at keeping it very simple.
Kim, you must be seeing lots of startups and talking to many of them who are going through this fundraising period. Many of them, in my experience, are very hard to coach, because oftentimes they are, while being stubborn is a good thing for entrepreneurs, but being too stubborn is not. Where do you draw the line, or where do you invest your time when it comes to advising these startups? Because sometimes, or oftentimes, it might be a wasted energy on advising founder who doesn't listen.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with this?
It's absolutely true. I think being coachable might be, or at least being humble might be the most important characteristic we look for, but also we know investors are usually attracted to, right? In the end, we are not a kindergarten or we're not babysitters, right? So if a founder decides that they don't want advice or they don't need mentorship, that's completely up to them. They might benefit in other ways, right? They might like to sit around other entrepreneurs and have the occasional beer. That's fine. However, the ones that are really progressing the fastest are always the ones who are both asking for help in a various different way, but also giving back. We have some very successful founders in labs who, perhaps this is their fourth company, they really don't need me to explain the cap table to them, right? Or they really don't need us to help them make their first hires. However, they are still, the most successful ones are still coachable, even though perhaps this guy, for example, has been VP at Rolls-Royce for years and ran their venture arm, right? So yeah,
it's true. It's true. David, you get to see a lot of startups, not just at Startup Grind events, but it's your job to advise startups and help them with the legal work. You're also kind enough to offer to speak to startups on our events while listening to what the issues are. Where do you draw the line in terms of which founders are the real deal and which founders are not really serious about building a company?
It's so hard, isn't it? Because any rule that you set for yourself, you can immediately think of an exception, right? So I know people who say, well, anybody who's just doing it part-time and hasn't quit their job to go and run the company, they're not serious. But actually, I've got clients who started off that way.
I disagree with that.
Right, absolutely.
Disagree with that.
There's people like the number of founders on the team. So I think my short answer is I don't think there's any rule. I think there's lots of founders from all walks of life and in all different sorts of situations. Some of them have worked in industry for 20 years and decided to go and do a startup now. And again, a lot of people saying, well, they're big business. They're not going to know how to start up. Completely disagree. I don't think that works as a rule either. I'm sorry. I'd love it if there was a snappy answer, but I don't think there is. I think what you do, and it goes back to, I think, Kim's first remark was, you find somebody who's sort of passionate about a thing. And I think you generally, once you've been speaking to them for a while about what their business idea is, you can see the people who are genuinely doing this because they've got a spark for it. And you can see the people who are doing this because, there's a lot of people who are out there at the moment doing video conferencing for X, right? Because suddenly we're all stuck at home. Now, some of those people are really passionate about video conferencing for X because being stuck in this situation, they've discovered, hey, here's a pain point that I didn't know existed. I think I can solve it. Some of those people are just doing it because they figure that's a startup that's going to get funded in Q4. So, you can see which ones are in it for the long haul and which ones aren't once you've spoken to people for a while.
And David, like I've seen some, you see different things, right? You see people who have a real clarity on what they're trying to achieve, and you just know they're going to do it. You see other people who you just know they're going to work through whatever obstacles come the way, and then you've got people who are just able to attract good people to them. But maybe Kim, if I can ask you a question, I've in all the companies and the demo days and the programs you've run, you must see a lot of people that just don't come back. When they start hearing that direct feedback, that they're just not cut out to take it on board and just don't come back.
With don't come back, what do you mean? Like give up?
Well, yeah. Well, I think in the very early stages, I think you see some people who are interested in the startup space for the buzz of it and the excitement that goes with it. But when it starts getting real, they potentially haven't realized, what's involved. And as you said, how coachable they need to be.
I think we don't have many of those because so WeWork Labs is a paid program, as in you just pay for the WeWork desk kind of, right? So we don't take equity. First I was like, who's gonna pay for an accelerator? But it turned out that actually the teams who come out of other accelerators, for example, for Techstars, they are still small enough that they are not just going to sit in some private office just by themselves. They still need people around them, right? So we actually have very few of those. Sometimes the feedback is very harsh, right? We do these polls live in front of 200, 300 investors where we ask them out of this vertical, which one was your favorite? There's never a clear favorite, by the way. There's always there's always a few that are catching that, but sometimes people get 0 votes. I don't think anyone has ever dropped out after that. Like it usually, yes, it can be super frustrating, but then there's luckily a lot of others who are going through the same pit, and it's an opportunity to improve, right? So I don't know, maybe maybe it's just I don't know. Interesting point though.
Derek, you said you used to work at an accelerator before. Mm-hmm. And you saw founders, entrepreneurs, evolve the idea. How much do you normally have the idea evolve until they become really investor ready? Because sometimes, we see lots of founders who are at the very early stage, they try to please investors too much. And I noticed that oftentimes investors don't like it because they ask these questions just to double check how convinced they are, how much passion they have. In your experience, how much do you think founders should be flexible about their idea of what they want to achieve, as opposed to trying to please investors too much?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it depends. Really depends on the audience and who you're speaking with. Like those stages when you're really early and you just want money from anywhere. That's when people potentially make the big mistake, and they take in that angel investor who'll write the first 50 grand check, doesn't know the industry, and is going to sort of almost bully them into doing the startup that they want. And I think obviously as you get a bit more traction, you get a bit more confidence, you get a bit more credibility. It's easier to stay where you want. But I think you've got to be very clear. I mean, if you're speaking to an investor who's bringing more than money to the table, they're bringing a lot of experience in the industry. They're bringing contacts. They're bringing they're bringing their network and their experience and potentially other partnerships that they can open up the door to. And they've probably seen some of the mistakes you're going to make. And I think you've got to be, it's back to Kim's point about being coachable, right? You've got to know what your vision is, know what you want to achieve, but you've got to learn who are the people to listen to and who are the people not to listen to. Actually, one of my favorite exercises.
Such a good point, Derek. I love that.
But here's the thing, like one of my favorite exercises with early stage companies is like, if you look at all the companies that are out there, the successful people that are out there that you idolize, you first of all have to go through them and figure out what type of company they are. Are they B2C companies? Are they SaaS companies? B2B? What are they? And just ignore the advice from the people that are not the same type of company as you, because their advice is just not going to be relevant. Super cool story and it might be fun, but it may not be relevant to your business and where you want to go.
Can I add to that, just to make it super clear to this audience? Please don't ever try and please investors. Your business exists to solve a customer problem, right? It might be useful to listen to the occasional investor. I mean, Derek, exactly what you say. If they are operating in your industry, and they might look for certain metrics that you should probably look to achieve, but I think the only reason you should be flexible in your idea, Marianne, is if it turns out that your current solution doesn't solve the problem for your customer, right? Then you should always be changing, but never to please an investor, please.
David, any other tips which you can think of regarding investors, and especially when they are so far as signing a contract, there are always these fights about the share of equity which founders are happy to offer the investors. How much room do you advise startups to leave for negotiation about the valuation and the share?
Yeah, I mean the rule of thumb is 20%, but genuinely you see a huge amount of variation now. So you do see sort of early pre-seed rounds. I'm seeing 10% and 15% a lot more commonly than I used to. And that sort of 20% round, there is a much greater variation now. I'd say it's in a range of sort of 15, even up to 25. So, around 20, but not necessarily 20. 20 was a sort of hard rule for quite a long time. The question I often get asked is, how do I set my valuation? And, what can I point to and say, this is why I'm valued at what I'm valued at? And I think that's the wrong question at the early stage. Once you get later, there are established ways of doing that. So you're looking at MRR, or you're looking at, whatever the key metric is in the business that you work in. And you can work backwards from that to evaluation. In the very early stage, basically what you're doing is finding somebody who's willing to buy 15 to 20 to 25%, whatever it's going to be, of your cap table for the amount of money that you need. And that's what determines your valuation, right? So if you need to raise 150 grand, then you can reverse engineer that from 15% or 20% or whatever it is, and that gives you your valuation. And you just kind of have to plant your flag and say, there's no point in me raising this if you're going to tell me that you need 50% of the company for 150 grand. I might as well just go home, right? So, sort of, you can point to my revenues, or you can point to my headcount, or whatever other metric there is, and say, well, your valuation should be lower. But the truth of it is, it's just a commercial negotiation, and it's just, I need to get to a point where I'm giving you a percentage of equity that I'm happy to give you, and you're giving me money that you're happy to give me, and that's my valuation.
Okay, so we have 1 minute to go. Let me ask each of you for one simple tip which you would like to leave the audience with. Kim, what would you advise founders to get investor ready?
Honestly, just the same way you try to creep into the mind of your customer and understand what incentivizes them, try to do that for investors. I think understanding what incentivizes them, the time of their fund, those sort of things. Just read Venture Deals. It's a book. I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, maybe just to pick up on what David said, like the investment amount, the market will set that, but there's other things that will come into play, such as, and certainly at later stages, are you going to set aside an amount of equity for your employees? So definitely later that's going to come in. You can possibly use that earlier as part of your negotiation piece. So just having a look at that, modeling that, getting your cap table clean, I have to say that, but getting your cap table sorted would be the big one.
Okay. David, final thought?
Yeah, just understand what it is that you do, and therefore what aspects of it are important, and focus your energy, focus your available time and legal spend, or whatever it is that you're going to put into it, on that. Because when you go to your investor and you tell them this is what we do, those are the things they're going to want to see. So make sure that they're up to scratch, put them out first, and then don't worry so much about the other bit.
Very useful. Kim, Derek, David, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.